Hello, everybody. This is Keith Siska from Last Call Bar Academy, and I'm here talking with a group of beginners about how to start studying for the LSAT. And so I'm going to review an article that I found published by LSAT Clarity. It was called How to Study for the LSAT the Smart Way. And I think there's a lot of insight in this article, but there's also a couple key points that I disagree with. And so I want to break it down and make sure that articles like this aren't misleading people about the proper time frame for LSAT prep. Okay, so our topic today is how to study, and this article on LSAT Clarity website claims this is the smart way to study, and in many ways I think they've got it right. Just mostly the time frame where I think that they are a little unrealistic. First, they talk about when to start preparing for the LSAT. And what they say here is at least 12 to 16 weeks before your test date. That I think accounts for what we were discussing before I started the recording, which is that many people put the cart before the horse. They pick a cycle, pick their desired admission date, and then start working backward from there and say, well, then I would have to take this particular LSAT, which means I should start studying 3 or 4 months before that. And I think that is a huge trap because you set up this time frame that's unrealistic from the beginning. I'll explain why, and then feel bad about yourself when all the dominoes don't fall in a row. So, what I say to answer the question, when should you start preparing, is right now, because you don't really know which cycle, how long the process is going to take. So, just start prepping. And when you start hitting your goal score on your practice tests consistently, then you'll know you're ready for the real thing. Once you have your official score established, then you'll know that you're ready to start getting your applications together. And so that may entail a non-ideal time frame about which cycle or which administration ensues, but that's just how it works. You don't get to pick the rate at which you learn something. One of the things that I've talked about in previous videos is that learning the LSAT is a lot like learning a foreign language. And to see if that analogy holds, I went out and did some research. What are the language experts saying about how long it takes to learn foreign languages? To get to the mastery level, 6 to 18 months of full-time immersion study of a foreign language is what it takes to learn it, to the degree that I think most LSAT students want to learn the LSAT. So the idea that you're going to study for 3 to 4 months, I think, is really the exception rather than the rule. You should plan on studying for at least 6 months. LSAT students are eternal optimists. So if I tell them 6 to 18 months, they'll say, so 6 months? No, not necessarily. 6 months is, at the lower end of the range of what I think is typical. Certainly, there are people and stories. I did it in 3 months. I did it in 4 months. But as I mentioned, after a dozen or more years of teaching LSAT, I really find that to be the exception, not the norm. Even for very intelligent people who are prepping diligently for the test, I still find that it often takes them a couple of attempts, and now we're into the 6 month range. So even for very dedicated students, I think that's a realistic range. Now, most students are not studying full time. They're going to school, working, have family obligations, or some combination of all of those. And so the language experts say that if you are not doing a full time immersion study of the language, you essentially have to double your initial time estimate. So now we're talking about 1 to 3 years for LSAT prep. This is why I tell people the moment of inception of your idea to go to law school is so far removed from the final thing that you can completely hinder your progress toward that goal by just focusing on something that's so far out. It's years away. And the first order of business is getting your LSAT score. You can't set the timeline for this. I'm a case in point. I thought, as a former MCAT teacher with very high MCAT scores, that my LSAT prep process would be shorter than the 6 to 18 months that I'm explaining to you guys. And it ended up being a 2-year process for me. Now I was working full time, so it falls square in the middle of the experts' predictions of what it will take to get to a master level status on a foreign language. You can't set the timeline. So you just shouldn't register for the test until you're consistently hitting your goal score. That will alleviate a ton of anxiety. Every time I tell students that, they say, "Yeah, but I really want to go this cycle. I have to go this cycle." And I just kind of shrug my shoulders and say they don't let people in based on desire. They let people in based on LSAT score and GPA. So if you really want to go, let go of the idea that you have to go this cycle and get to work prepping for the LSAT. You're hindering yourself by insisting on choosing a goal that's unrealistic. Some people tell me if I go ahead and register, then it's real. Then I've got the pressure of the real thing. And again, I say, you're not listening to me. That pressure is going to cause you to do things that are, you know, unhelpful in your prep process. It's an unnecessary anxiety while you're trying to learn a foreign language to say, okay, 3 months from now, I'm going to take a master level exam in that foreign language, often creates more anxiety than pressure to work hard. It's part of the paralysis, I think, for some test takers. There's so much to do and they haven't given themselves sufficient amount of time. So I find you just shouldn't register, or if you do, take note of the date for which you have to postpone to do it for free without paying the fee. And then make sure that by that date, you're continuing to postpone to the next administration, provided that you're not consistently hitting your goal score yet. It's fine, I think, if you want to kick the can down the road in that sense, but to go past that date and go ahead and lock yourself in, I think that creates anxiety for people. And then I have a lot of people asking me, what do I do about the anxiety? Well, don't create it. Don't set an arbitrary deadline. Get the practice test scores that you need before you register for the test. All right, how do you start studying for the test? Schedule your study time. I think that it's interesting to me how people plan to do a lot of studying and then they don't have a planner, don't have a calendar where they've scheduled the study time. I had a really sharp writing coach who did a session one time with a group of faculty when I was teaching at UT. It was a group of faculty who were complaining about being unable to get their writing projects finished. And she asked us, take out your calendars and let me see what's on them. It was like class, take the kids to school, blah, blah, blah. And what she was noting about most of our schedules is that we hadn't actually scheduled finish writing project. And she had a really clever saying. This is why I remember her so much. She said, if you show me your calendar, I'll tell you what's important to you. And that's always really stuck with me, to think very carefully about my time every day. What's important to me? What is it that I want to accomplish today? And can I kind of take charge of my schedule to make that happen? So I map it out every single day. Oh, I have a bad example today. I only mapped out till noon till my pro bono session. But after lunch, I will map out the rest of the day. I just knew this was my big appointment for the day, was a 1 hour presentation. So I prepped for it. I planned for it, created a presentation, etc. Document the purpose of each study session. It amazes me how LSAT students waste time. They study and study and study. And I'm like, what are you doing? What are you hoping to accomplish? What's the purpose of reading another strategy book? And so I try to think about it more in terms of micro goals. What is it that you're trying to accomplish right now within the next hour? What are you going to be able to do or say or know that you didn't before this hour? And then at the end, if you set a tangible goal, you can ask whether you accomplished it. Setting these series of tangible goals is about laying the bricks that will ultimately build the foundation for your strong score. Be consistent. Consistency is the key. One of the most frustrating things for me is students who stop and start. They backtrack, retrace, and really never gain a real grasp of the material. If you think I'm right with the analogy of learning a foreign language, then it has to be something that you accumulate gradually and consistently It's not really possible to learn a foreign language a little bit at a time and then pick up where you left off after a gap in your prep. I think one of the reasons why LSAT prep is so difficult is that there's a ton of material to learn, not just materials on the market, but legitimately, what are you supposed to learn? All of that logic, all of those kinds of games, all of that vocabulary, all of these different subjects where you have to have some content familiarity, it really is a lot of stuff. And I don't find that the market is doing a good job of presenting it clearly. What are you supposed to be learning? Instead, they're trying to give you 3 4 month programs that are really expensive. And then I find that the goal was unrealistic to start with, to learn this language to master level in 3 or 4 months. One of the things that I'll say is that the complexity of the LSAT is intentional. The lack of clarity in the presentation of the rules of the exam is intentional, and I find it to be extremely clever. It reminds me of the process of learning case law. When judges decide cases, they're not doing so with the intention of teaching lawyers about the law. It's very practical. It's all about the outcome of that case. And so the case itself doesn't fit cleanly into an outline. The body of law that that case embodies hasn't been created yet. It's in the process of formation as that case is being decided. So it's intentional that the rules of the LSAT are obscure. You're supposed to learn them as you go by analyzing the questions and the work that you do, just like a lawyer or a law student will learn the law by analyzing each case one at a time and then making adjustments to their prior understanding of that area of law or that body of case law. I quoted something recently. I shared an article on my page about exercising. And I found it to be really interesting because for some people, LSAT prep is torture. And that's always kind of perplexed me as a teacher. I find the LSAT to be very, very clever, often fun. Even when it tricks me, I find it to be a lot of fun. But my students don't see it that way. They're very frustrated by it. It reminds me of the dynamic for me trying to exercise. For me, being fit is incredibly frustrating. I hate every moment that I'm exercising. I hate the way I feel after I've exercised. And then for the hour or two, once I've recovered, when I feel good about it, is all erased when I go to sleep and wake up the next day and realize I have to do it all again. So I hate exercising. And this article that I shared about how to really gain hold of your exercise regimen, I thought was so applicable to my law school students as well. Basically, what the article said was that a perfectionist is going to fail at this process because it's about being willing to do something when you can't be perfect. That's really struck a chord with me. A lot of people don't study the LSAT because, oh, I just don't, not feeling it today. Not good at this. I don't feel ready yet for a practice test. I need another strategy book first. So what I found interesting was this quote from the article that I have here on the consistency bullet. You must allow yourself to do something every day that is so minuscule that it's only slightly better than doing nothing at all. And if you're willing to do that every day, just something, it becomes a habit that you can build on. And that is far more important than inspiration. That was the key point of the article, that inspiration isn't what builds fitness, it's habit. And the same thing applies for LSAT understanding. It's not about intellectual inspiration. It's about building the intellectual habit of studying, reviewing, and interpreting this material in a very diligent way. Okay, how to start studying for the LSAT. Here's some more points they made in the article. The LSAT tests skills, not content. I think that is absolutely on point. I've made that point many times. You'll see that point made in other resources. And so the bottom line is that you can't memorize your way to a good LSAT score. Not the same way you might be able to on a test like the MCAT, where it's highly content driven. So the LSAT requires a ton of practice with the timed official test. That's why I think LawHub is an indispensable source at this point. You can't get that from the LSAT trainer or from drills from a book. It truly is essential that you transition very quickly to timed practice tests, official materials. And with more than 70 official practice tests available on LawHub, there's plenty of material to go from beginning to end with official material as the basis of your study regimen. The LSAT is definitely not conducive to cramming. This is what I was driving at before when I say that people who set goals that are too ambitious end up sabotaging their own goal. They try to cram essentially, and then it doesn't work. But what's worse is that the time that they spent cramming is wasted. They could have been achieving more reasonable goals during that time. But by shooting for the ultimate goal, they end up doing things that aren't helpful to any kind of development. And that's when you see people hitting plateaus and then not being able to break out of them. The article, the LSAT Clarity article also says allocate time for in-depth analysis. I agree with that also, 100%. But here's a weakness, I think, in the LSAT market. Very few people are explaining what does that mean to analyze the LSAT in depth. For some people, it means reviewing your mistakes. And I think that is a really superficial way to review the LSAT. In fact, I think that looking up the right answers after a time test already creates some superficiality to the process. And so I created a process called triple review. I created this with my partner, Jacob Feldman. We believe that it's a step-by-step description of how to analyze the LSAT deeply. So if you want more information about triple review, we try to share that pretty liberally. Reach out to me and I'll send you some links, and I'm happy to do full sessions and recordings on whatever aspect of triple review you find confusing, because I didn't develop this as a gimmick to market my product. I developed it based on the psychology of learning, and I wanted it to be a deep learning method that my students could use for self-study so that they could eliminate the need for the vast majority of the resources on the market. I truly think with LawHub and triple review and a good dictionary, you could make more progress than you could with a majority of the resources on the market if you just set your mind to it and had an organized plan to go about it. The article that I'm basing this on also says that studying for the LSAT is a long-term undertaking. And I'll add to that that's why I think consistency is the key. It's about accretion, making small gains and then building upon those. And just like my fitness example, it requires a lifestyle change. You have to make lifestyle changes to accommodate the changes that you want to make to your brain and to your brain structure. Just like for me to get fit, I've had to make lifestyle changes that I find to be uncomfortable and unpleasant. All right, there's a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to see what that's about before I move on. Kurt has shared a video that he thinks is good from my YouTube channel. So all of these live sessions that I record, I put them on my YouTube channel, which is called LSAT Life. And if you want to go back and watch previous sessions, feel free to. If there's a particular topic that you want me to do a future session on, I'm happy to do that as well. And so what I'll do is typically get to know my audience first, start the recording, and then once I'm done with my presentation, I stop it and answer questions without the recording. So stay tuned if you want to ask questions, and if you want to request things in the future, I'm happy to chat with you about it. I have a few more slides and then we'll get to the questions. The next thing that the article says is maintain a positive attitude. And again, I agree 100% with the sentiment here. I shared another article on my business page that you'll find if you go and search. It's about why it's so hard for us to admit we're wrong, why we think we're right even when we're wrong about things. And one of the points that the article made was that some of it has to do with our educational system, where we're not rewarded for being wrong about things. And I found that to be a really powerful combination of ideas, the LSAT Clarity article plus this thing I had shared on my business page. The conclusion of the article that I got from Ashton, she's a frequent visitor to my free sessions, but she's not here today. But at any rate, their conclusion was that what we need the most is not more instruction in logic, rhetoric, probability, or economics. That sort of wounds me because I like to instruct in logic, rhetoric, probability, and economics, even though those things are valuable. We need to change the way we feel, to learn how to feel proud instead of ashamed when we notice we might have been wrong about something. That's something that I learned to embrace as a teacher. At one time, it embarrassed me as a teacher to make a mistake, and it was threatening to me. It would mean I wasn't the expert. At some point, I became so expert at the LSAT that that wasn't threatening anymore. I could miss a question and it still wouldn't be reasonable to question my expertise on the LSAT. And so at that point, it became truly fun when I could make an error and learn from it, and other people could watch me do that. And I try to model that for my students as much as possible because I want them to emulate that. I want you to feel like this is about having fun, learning something very, very challenging, which means you're going to make a ton of mistakes. What if you wanted to learn how to do a backflip? That would be a really arduous process if you couldn't laugh a few times when you didn't get all the way around, presuming you had the right safety equipment, of course. Uh, so you have to be not ashamed. You have to feel proud when you notice that you're wrong about something, or you have to learn how to feel intrigued instead of defensive when you encounter some information that contradicts your beliefs. 100%. I've taken that principle to heart so much as a teacher that I will say that some of the best ideas I have come from my students because I don't view myself as a fount of information. I view myself as a scholar of the LSAT who's interested in many viewpoints, including ones that contradict my own. Okay, next point, target efficiency, not speed. If I had a nickel for every time someone asked me, how do I get faster? Then I'd be a rich man because that is, the question I get the most from students. And my answer is, that's the neat part. You don't get faster. Not today anyway. It's analogous to how do I get stronger? You do it through long-term repetition and practice. There's absolutely nothing you can do today to be faster at the LSAT. So commit to the long-term process. And part of that process should entail mastering grammar and logic. Mastering grammar means you can't use verbal tricks to categorize questions. You can't categorize questions based on language, or you shouldn't, based on keywords. Instead, you should master the grammar. Every single question should be interpreted independently, and then you analyze whether that question falls into a category of questions having similarities. We talked a little bit about that before I started the recording today, and so that's a good follow-up to that. The grammar, English grammar, is central to the LSAT. There are very few books that are honest about that point. Many of the strategy books are giving you tricks to avoid mastering the grammar, in my opinion. The books that come to mind that are doing well in terms of their discussion of learning grammar as opposed to test gimmicks, there's two books that I think are doing well in that respect. The LSAT Trainer is good because it gives a strong nod to paraphrasing as an important skill. And I also think that The Loophole by Ellen Cassidy is good, particularly the first 8 chapters, because they focus on a grammatical or verbal trick that is employed in argumentation. And in fact, I think that Ellen's book is so successful and has exposed this trick to such a great deal that the LSAT writers have had to pivot away from it because it's easier to spot the trick now, given that Ellen has given it such a clever name, The Loophole. The last thing on this slide is review your answers. Notice what I didn't say here. I didn't say review your wrong answers, which is the stock advice given by most test prep sources. it's people's intuitive notion, let me figure out which ones I got wrong and figure out why. But I think that the best practice, and this article seems to agree, is to review every answer. And you do that through a really robust process of blind review. That means that after you take a time test or do a time section, you can't look up the answers, because doing so taints your ability to review all the questions. Instead, you should go back, repeat every single question on that section, and independently answer the question untimed to either confirm or deny your original answer. And ideally, I want you to not know the correct answer, not know which ones you got right or wrong, and in an ideal setting, I think you shouldn't even know what you picked the first time around. It should be a completely cold, fresh, unbiased, deep review of the same question. It's powerful even on the questions that you got right, because it demonstrates to you that your logic was correct. And that's how you start to develop appropriate shortcuts rather than gimmicks or tricks. You start to identify what are the steps that are leading effectively to the right answer, and then how can I streamline that particular process? Okay, that's my last slide. So I'm going to end the session there, or the recording anyway, and I will take some questions. Oh no, I have one more slide. Sorry. Let me go back to it. I don't want to skip this one. How long should I study for the LSAT? Because this is the key point where I disagreed with the article. I've had points where I agree, little points where I disagree, but that's that in LSAT prep. Here's the point where I strongly disagree and why I think they are misleading people, many people anyway. How long should I study? They say as long as you need to be ready, and then they follow up with like shoot for like 250 or 300 hours, and I'm just like face palming. That would get you to an elementary level of speaking in a foreign language, that a 250 to 300 hour mark. That'd be enough to be a tourist and be someone who obviously doesn't know the language, to be expert, to be a master at the language. I don't think that's an appropriate time frame. You should be aiming for about 1,000 hours of LSAT prep, given 20 to 25 hours a week. So the way that I arrived at that number 1,000, I said, what if you're on the lower end? Suppose you're really sharp. You can do 20 hours a week of full-time studying, and you're at the lower end, the 6-month mark. I think that was like 500 hours of prep. So maybe some people can do it in less than 1,000 hours. But then at the upper end, if you're putting in 25 hours and you find that the LSAT is not as easy a language for you as it is for others, and you need more like 18 months, I think that was something more like 1,800 hours. And so it was a pretty wide range, 500 to 1,800 hours. And I figured the average would be somewhere in the middle, somewhere around 1,000 hours of LSAT preparation. I think their estimate of 250 to 300 hours is unrealistically low. But that's my take on it. I'd be glad to hear what you all's experiences are, and whether people are able to do it in less time or not. And if so, how? Um, but the final point that I'll leave you with is that I think dreaming about the long-term goal is fine, but without having a really concrete plan to get there, it's just a wish. And so you can't really plan your application, decide which schools you want to go to, and do all of that until you have an official LSAT score. So plan your way to a good LSAT score before you dream your way out of contention for law school. Okay, that's all I have for my presentation. So I'm going to stop the recording and take some questions.